All right, beautiful people. Today's guest is Mr. Michael Pyne from HealthWest. It's all about mental health today. How you doing today, Mike?
I'm good. How are you, Paul?
Doing great, man. Doing great. It's great to see you. Great to
Good to
talk to
see
you.
you too.
All right. Suicide is on the rise.
Well, let's talk about health, wellness, and recovery picnic for just a second, if I could first.
Sure.
Tomorrow afternoon, 11 o'clock until about 2:30, health, wellness, and recovery picnic downtown in Hackley Park. First 1,000 people through the door get a free lunch. There's going to be 95 vendors down there talking about all things health related. And so I just wanted to throw that out there and let people know that they can come and come down to heck. Let's hope the weather holds. So tomorrow
What time
afternoon,
is that again, Mike? What time is that again?
11 o'clock. Gates open at 11 o'clock. First 1,000 people through get a free lunch. And it goes until about 2. Lots of vendors, lots of things around health, lots of giveaways, stuff like that. So come and see us.
Okay, there you go. Tomorrow.
Now you want to talk mental health and suicide a little bit, huh? This is one day I'm going to come in and I swear we're going to talk about something really happy one day, Paul. That's what we're going to do one of these days, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to take a trip with you to Africa. We'll come back and we'll talk about my expect right? From my perspective.
There you go. That would be enlightening. That would be a change of conversation.
It sure would.
Matter of fact, I think if most people take that trip to Africa, it might help out the mental health side.
I agree. Travel, get out there, see the world, meet other people, other cultures. It's always important to do. So Muskegon, I just got off of a call. I'm a part of a statewide group and a nonprofit that we helped start right out of here in Muskegon, Michigan. And that nonprofit is called With One Voice, and it seeks to help with suicide prevention statewide. It grew from Muskegon County into a statewide group called With One Voice. And MDHHS the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services has tapped us to partner with them, as well as the Suicide Prevention Resource Center out of Washington, D.C., to coordinate suicide across the state. So I throw that out here because a lot of people in this community have worked so hard with suicide and suicide. Positive things have grown out, not just to help our community, but now also to help people across the state. So, I got to throw that out there. And if anybody's interested in being a part of the With One Voice meetings, they happen on a quarterly basis. They can always reach out to me at HealthWest and we'll connect them and make sure they get on the email list. As for Muskegon County, we've got a lot coming up. So next month is Suicide Prevention Month. September 10th is World Suicide Prevention Day. On the 12th of September, we are doing our annual Suicide Remembrance and Prevention Walk, 6 o'clock at night, downtown at the Old Off Stage, right near the Frohenthal entrance. We are going to, on the 12th, have this remembrance walk. And quite often that's obviously going to be people coming who have lost somebody to suicide. But for those individuals, too, who have maybe had a serious suicide attempt or a suicide attempt at all in their families, we just want to bring this out of the shadows, out of the darkness, and be able to meet with other people who've had a similar experience, and also to talk about suicide prevention and what we're doing in the community here. So the Muskegon County Suicide Prevention Coalition, they've got a Facebook page out there for those who are still utilizing Facebook or Meta or whatever it's called. There is Suicide Prevention Coalition of Muskegon County. You can find them on Facebook, find a little more information about the walk, and we're really hoping we can get some folks down. I'll get some more information to you about that, Paul. So why we got to continue to talk about this. There's some real issues happening here. 10 years ago when I started doing this, Paul, and we were talking, we had a pretty serious youth suicide problem in the county. Right. And we hit a point where we had about 4.5 years where we did not lose a school-age young person. No one who was in, 12th grade and under, we had not lost for 4.5 years. And sadly, since January 20, We're heading into nearly 3 years now. We've lost a young person about every 4 or 5 months. And
Wow.
that is a huge number of children, by the way,
Yes.
in any community. This also, it touches everyone. The Native American community in our community has been touched. The African American community has been touched. Obviously, suicide knows no boundaries, and sadly, we're seeing this. Now, across the country, the suicide rates for youth have begun to come down. In our community, they have not. I want to hope that they're going to come down, and I want people to come out and take a training, right? And we'll talk about that in just a minute. And I'm going to talk about the adult suicide rate, or the overall suicide rate, for Muskegon County. Last year, we had the highest suicide rate that we've ever experienced. And by far, we had the highest number of suicide deaths in Muskegon County that we've ever had. And part of this is post-pandemic, the economic situation that we're experiencing, racial unrest throughout the pandemic, and some of the other social factors and ills that we're experiencing out there in the world day to day. All of these things have likely impacted the suicide rate here, and it's very disheartening. It's hard. As a suicide prevention worker, I take it personally as well. It's a very challenging thing in our community. So I just want to encourage people, visit Eventbrite. If you look for Eventbrite and HealthWest online, Google that, or go to healthwest.net and look for trainings, search trainings. We are out there doing trainings on how you can spot potential suicide in individuals, how you can help people. We have a lot of offerings, and we still need people to get up to speed on, how do I help somebody? How do I ask the question? How do we reduce the stigma around just having the conversation? We're seeing suicide rates in the nation have skyrocketed, and Muskegon County is one of those. Our neighboring counties have actually decreased while we've gone up, and we're at the highest rate we've ever been since we've been keeping records. I want to believe that it will come down soon, but I think it can only come down soon if we all work together and we're reaching out to our neighbors and those people around us, and we're really supporting each other. So that's all kind of bad news there, Paul.
Wow. Michael Pyne from HealthWest. Does this include drug overdoses?
No. Now, that doesn't mean, obviously, those individuals who the medical examiner, investigators who are on the scene, if they determine that that person took drugs in order to take their life, that, of course, is going to be called a suicide. If they can't determine whether or not that was a suicide, it can go either way. And oftentimes, suicide overdoses are listed separately, and we lose many more people to overdose than we do to suicide. And we have a huge suicide problem, in my opinion, in the county here. Also, what we know from research is the number that you have for suicide is likely double, because quite often people can hide their suicides, right? Taking an overdose, not leaving a note, single person car crashes. There's lots of ways that people can hide a suicide, and they do it for lots of reasons: religious reasons, stigma to the family, etc. And so it's likely that our suicide rate is higher, but we also have a big opioid and overdose problem still in the community as well.
Are they all connected? The overdose, the drug use, is drug use a mental health issue?
Drug use is a mental health issue. No one says, I can't wait till I grow up and I can have a heroin problem. I can't wait till I grow up and I can have a crack problem. No one does that, right? No one says, I can't wait to grow up and I can be on my 600-pound life, or on hoarders or intervention. All of these addiction related things are a part of brain function. This is a health concern, and this is about a brain doing something we wish it wouldn't. There's very few addicts out there in the world that you're going to meet who want to be addicts. People don't. They understand that this is an illness, and we need to put it on that medical level. And quite often people will say, well, it's their choice. They put the drugs into themselves. Yep. At some point they maybe did that, right? But even every addiction, many poor health outcomes can be traced back to trauma, right? So, as a little example, and don't watch these shows, but if you've watched My 600-Pound Life or Hoarders or Intervention, the first 10 minutes of those shows, what do they focus on? They focus on trauma. Something befell that person that was traumatic and terrible. This includes generational trauma, historical trauma, as well as trauma in our youth, etc. And it's often trauma that gives us poor health outcomes. So yes, did somebody make the choice to start using drugs or alcohol? Maybe they had a huge depression problem or an anxiety problem because of some traumatic incident. And when they drank that beer, they felt a little better. Now they've got two problems. Now they've got an addiction and an anxiety problem. And then once they have that addiction, now the frontal lobe isn't doing what we wish it would do. Now their decision making is out the window, and now this addiction has got them full steam and they're caught up in it. This is a medical problem. This is about a brain not doing what we wish it would do, and this is steeped in trauma more often than not. And we need to understand that, and we need to work with those individuals on that medical level.
Well, Michael Pyne, HealthWest, talking mental health, talking suicide. Let's talk particularly to the Black community. What are we seeing in suicide in regards to Black youth?
Okay, here's what I will tell you. When we look at the suicide rate, what you're going to find is middle-aged white guys, older white guys. That's your big group who's dying the most in America. That has been the largest group historically. It's always been considered kind of a middle-aged and older white guy problem, right? Anthony Bourdain, Robin Williams, et cetera, right? That's the age group that has historically had that problem. Now, here in Muskegon County, for many years, it was young people, younger than me, certainly, Paul, between the ages of maybe 28 and 40 who were dying in bigger numbers than older white guys. And across the nation, if you look, you're going to see that African-American suicide rates are much lower than their white counterparts. But what we know through research is, and obviously through numbers, is adults are dying, African-American individuals in the Black community are dying by suicide at an increasing rate. But above and beyond that, with research, when we are interviewing people and doing research, what we find is African-American individuals are seriously considering suicide at the same rate as their white counterparts and a little bit more. Wow. African-American individuals are even attempting suicide at about the same rate, surviving their attempts at about the same rate as white folks. What it feels like to me when I look at this research, and what I hope this isn't, is that the Black community is perched at this place where I'm afraid it could grow, and it appears to be growing. When we talk about deaths in the African-American community around suicide, really the task is, let's make sure this doesn't grow in our community. What are the things that we need to do? How do we reach out to each other? So now let's talk youth. During COVID, the suicide rate decreased. Your politicians will tell you it increased. They're not telling you the truth. The suicide rate dropped, and we knew it would drop. And we knew this because of research around epidemics and pandemics going back to the Spanish flu of 1918, okay? Mm-hmm. So the suicide rate dropped in America. And now you're starting to see people on TV saying, oh, the suicide rate actually dropped. The suicide rate's going down. But what they don't tell you is during the time when the suicide rate was dropping, it was increasing in the Black community. And that message isn't coming through your broadcasts and your news. And now that people are beginning to really reinvestigate those numbers, the suicide rate went up in the African-American community while it went down for everybody else in the country during COVID. That speaks to perhaps trauma. We go back to the racial unrest, especially early on in COVID around the George Floyd death. These things are obviously always out there, but we had huge racial unrest out there. And then when you talk about economic situations, the economy is going to impact people's mental health in a much bigger way than even a pandemic does. And we still have economic problems. And so children, what we have seen in the African-American community is that African-American children are beginning to catch up with their white counterparts. The suicide rate is increasing there as well. And we've seen it in our own community a bit. We've seen more white children die here in Muskegon County, but we're not without losses in the African American community still. And what
And
happens?
Michael,
Yeah,
there's rarely any talk about it when it happens. It's like people can't relate in reality because they don't know who the people are. And I know you have the HIPAA laws and all that kind of
sure.
keep things
Yeah,
concealed, but wouldn't it be better if like we know about Anthony Bourdain? I'm glad you mentioned him because he impacted me because I watched every show. I'm an
yeah,
avid
yeah,
traveler. I respect him. I
yeah,
I I read so much about Anthony Bourdain. I was still just baffled when it happened. It really
yeah.
bothered me because I'm like nobody saw it coming, but
Well,
maybe
and
somebody did.
if you go back and watch some of his shows, he talks about killing himself in those shows.
Yeah,
There's a couple of
and it's
shows where
drug
he
use.
does talk, right?
Yep.
And he had a history of drug use,
Yes.
other trauma. He had depression problems, but I didn't think he was going to die either. And I love that show. I watched him all the time. Yeah. I
Every
think,
episode here, man. Every
yeah,
episode. So
yeah. So, we don't talk about it. And I think a lot of it is, I don't want to scare people, right? When I come out into the public, I hate to throw out statistics. I don't want to just scare people. What I want to do is prepare people and say, this is a medical concern, right? This is a community concern. This is a cultural concern. And this has its roots in all kinds of trauma and other issues that are going on out there. And if we can be there for each other and start to change our approach with each other, what is it that we're losing in the African American community that is leading to an increase in suicides that we didn't have until the past 10 years? What's changed I don't know, right?
we
I
got
don't
people
know.
that's watching on Facebook right now. Maybe they can make a comment. What are your thoughts if you're listening, you're watching? Why do you think there's an increase in suicide in the African American community? I believe it's isolation played a role. Isolation tremendously affected some
Yeah.
people mental
Well, and
psyches.
with children, I think too, this isn't across the board, of course. Obviously, we're still segregated in many ways when it comes to cultures, and
Right.
but with children, I think that there's a lot more communication around mental health with our children, with each other, and with social media. And I think it doesn't matter what your race is or what your gender is. You've got your schoolmates or your other friends talking about suicide, or maybe you've even known somebody who died by suicide, and all of a sudden that seems like an option to you. And so I don't know exactly when it comes to children, but quite frankly, I don't know that I have a good reason for why things are increasing in the Black community. Now, the Native American community has always had high rates of suicide, high rates of suicide, some of the highest. And you want to talk generational trauma and those things, and obviously poverty and social isolation and all this, addiction, alcohol impacts them differently than it does other races of people. And we can sort of understand that as we look at it. I think some of those attributes are still true within the African American community, especially when it comes to generational trauma, some of which I learned from you, Paul. Thank you for putting me on that path to educating myself. But I do think that generational and historical trauma is still something we need to discuss. And we're living in a society right now where, God forbid, you bring up anything that deals with race or gender, because now you're going to be marginalized and you're not allowed to talk about it in school, and you can't have books. And it's like, if we're not going to talk about this stuff, and I can't have any kind of communication about what I've been through in my life or generationally what I've gone through, that's more isolation. And it's more being dismissed by society. That doesn't help on top of other things. Anybody comment on what they think?
Not yet. No comments. Got people watching and listening, but no comments. A question for you: are the HealthWest able to do research on the people who have committed suicide to maybe figure out what
Well,
was happening in their life?
this is a good question too. Several years back, it's probably been about 6 years ago, I started doing something. I started a committee here called the Suicide Death Review Team, and we were working with our medical examiner investigator. And so we had law enforcement at the table. We had ISD school folks at the table. We had a doctor at the table. We had all kinds of people from the community at the table. And we go over every single death. And we charted 60 different data points on everybody who died in Muskegon County by suicide. We were the most data-rich county in the state of Michigan. We also had one of the highest suicide rates. Not the highest, but we've had very high suicide rates. And we had about 3 years of data, and things were going great. Other communities started asking us how they could get one going, and then medical examiners started to get kind of skittish about it, and HIPAA. We worked with legislators to pass laws so that we didn't have to worry about, the Open Meetings Act, where somebody could come and say, we want to see everything you reviewed. Even though deaths are a matter of public record. And so for about 3.5 years, we could not get any data in the community here. 3.5, almost 4 years. And then our we used to get all of the death certificates from the county clerk. And I'm not throwing shade here, but for about 3.5, 4 years, she stopped giving us death certificates on the suicides. And so we couldn't even get the data from those. And then we became the most data poor county. And this is a medical problem, and no medical problem is solved without data. And we didn't have any. Our new county clerk, who is a former county clerk, called her up after she kind of got settled, because I don't know, why am I not getting these? I worked with the clerk. I worked for years trying to get her to give us these. I called Karen Bowie, I believe is her name. And I said, hey, here's where we're at. And she was like, we're going to give you everything you need. And now we're starting to collect data again, and we're going to get there.
Yeah, she's going to do that. That's my big sister right there. I knew that. I knew that answer. What else you want to share before we go, Mike?
So we're getting there. I think we're getting there.
Yeah. What information you want to share? I've been.
You froze up on me, Paul, or did I freeze up on you?
Yeah. Maybe I froze up. I can hear you. I can hear you. Yep. I'll put the numbers up on the screen, but for our listeners on radio, it's 988. You can text or call 988 if you are a loved one is in the need of a suicide crisis lifeline. This line is open 24 hours a day here in Muskegon. If you or a loved one feels like you have a life-threatening emergency, please call 911. If you're in a crisis, you can call HealthWest 24/7 at 231-722-4357. Write those numbers down, save it into your phone as part of your contacts. You never know when you might need it for yourself or for a loved one. All right, Michael, thank you. Tomorrow, 11 o'clock, Hackley Park.
There you go.
Go ahead, recap that if you don't mind.
Tomorrow at 11 o'clock in Hackley Park, health, wellness, and recovery picnic. Lots of vendors down there. The first 1,000 people through the gates get a free lunch. Lots of giveaways. So we're hoping the weather holds. It's a big event, 85, 90 vendors. All kinds of information and things you can learn down there. And then on September 12th, the Suicide Remembrance and Prevention Walk will be downtown in Muskegon. At the Old Off stage right near the entrance to the Frohenthal, September 12th, 6 p.m. We'll get you more information about that, Paul. And we're hoping people can come out and just be supportive of the efforts around suicide prevention for that. And then I know that Stephanie's in touch with you. I think you're going to meet our new director in September. He's going to a little bit shy. He's a little bit shy about talking, but he's going to come in and you're going to meet our new director in September during this time slot. So
sounds like a winner. Thank you so much for being available, man.
Hey, I appreciate the opportunity, Paul, always.
All right. God bless.
Take care now.
Yep.